On Thanksgiving, my dad kicked me out and stopped paying for my studies. I worked hard until I got inheritance. Then Dad invited me to family dinner to ask for help, so I came and cut him off. Thanksgiving wasn't something I was looking forward to that year, but I showed up anyway. It felt more like an obligation than anything else. My dad had remarried almost immediately after the divorce to Scarlett, a woman barely 3 years older than me. She had the whole model actress thing going on, blonde, tall, always posting about her perfect life on social media. I tolerated her because, frankly, I had no choice. My dad paid for my tuition and living expenses, and I'd moved in with him after the divorce because my mom was tied up taking care of my grandmother, who was slowly losing her memory. Scarlett's family hosted that Thanksgiving, and I was the outsider from the moment I walked in the door. Her parents and siblings barely acknowledged me, save for a few half-hearted smiles. The vibe was clear: you don't belong here. I sat at the far end of the table, away from the inner circle of her family, where my father and Scarlett were the center of attention. I kept my head down, shoveling mashed potatoes and turkey, pretending not to notice the whispers and sideways glances from across the table. Scarlett's sister leaned over to another relative and whispered loud enough for me to catch parts of it. "Is that the child from his first marriage?" "Yes." "Poor guy, probably doesn't know he's being phased out." I clenched my jaw but didn't say anything. My dad had always been a little distant, but I didn't expect him to let these people talk about me like I was an unwanted houseguest. I figured I'd just get through dinner, make some lame excuse to leave early, and maybe grab some leftovers for later. But then my dad stood up and tapped his wine glass to get everyone's attention. His face was serious, a little too serious for Thanksgiving. I could feel something coming, and it wasn't good. "I have an announcement," he said, looking around the table. Scarlett sat next to him, a hand on her round belly, smiling as if she already knew what he was going to say. Everyone else leaned forward, curious. I sat up a little straighter, too. "So, as you all know, Scarlett and I are expecting a baby soon," he began, his voice awkward and rehearsed. Scarlett's relatives all nodded and mumbled their approval, one even clapping as if he just announced he'd cured cancer. My father smiled nervously and continued, "This is a really important time for us to start a new chapter as a family." He paused and looked at me. I could already sense where this was going. My chest tightened and I gripped my fork a little too tightly. "With this new chapter," he said, "we need to make some adjustments. And Carter," he sighed, as if he was about to say something so difficult, so noble. "I've been thinking a lot about your situation, and I've come to a decision. With the baby coming and Scarlett needing support, I won't be able to pay for your education or living expenses anymore." There was dead silence around the table for a second before someone at the far end muttered, "Good, about time he let go of the past." Another voice said, "It's the right thing to do, he needs to cut ties with his ex-wife's kid." Scarlett chuckled and looked at me as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "We have a lot to focus on with the baby," she added, as if that justified everything. I blinked a few times, trying to process what I'd just heard. My own father, the man who raised me, was kicking me out. Just like that. Over Thanksgiving dinner. "You're 18 now," he said, as if he were talking to a stranger instead of his son. "You'll figure things out. It's time to stand on your own 2 feet. I believe in you." "I believe in you? Are you serious?" My blood was boiling, but I didn't say a word. I didn't trust myself to speak. Scarlett's father raised a glass and toasted. "To new beginnings." Everyone followed his lead, laughing and cheering like it was some heartwarming Hallmark moment. I sat there, numb, as they celebrated the fact that my life was about to fall apart. Scarlett kept looking at me, her grin getting wider as if she was enjoying every second of it. I wanted to scream, to turn the table over and storm out, but instead I just sat there, frozen, pretending the words hadn't just gutted me. They didn't care. None of them cared. Not my father, not Scarlett, not anyone at that table. I was just baggage to be tossed out for their new chapter. Packing up wasn't new to me. I'd been doing it on and off since college. After my parents split up, I moved into the dorms, but I wasn't exactly living the dream. Most weekends the place was a ghost town. Everyone had families to go home to, and I didn't have much of a social life. My friends were close to their own families, and when they left for the weekend, I was stuck in an empty dorm with no one around. So I kept going back to my dad's house, even though I hated it there. I told myself it was just for the convenience of free food, my own room, and a chance to reset before the week started. But deep down, I think I wanted some kind of connection to my old life. Even if it was broken and twisted now, it was familiar. It was better than being all alone in a dorm room with the walls closing in. That's how I ended up at Thanksgiving. I didn't really want to go, but what else was I going to do? Sit alone in my dorm eating instant ramen while scrolling through pictures of everyone else's family dinners? I figured I could survive one awkward holiday dinner. As it turns out, I couldn't have been more wrong. 2 days after my dad dropped the bombshell about kicking me out, I was back in my room at his house, packing my things for the last time. Most of my stuff was already in the dorm, but I still had clothes, books, and a few personal items left here. Or at least I thought I did. A lot of it had mysteriously disappeared since Scarlett moved in. The photo of me, Mom, and Dad from my high school graduation? Gone. My baseball trophies? Gone. Even some of my favorite jackets were nowhere to be found. I knew Scarlett had probably thrown them away or hidden them somewhere out of sight. I wasn't about to search the house for answers. As I was packing, I heard footsteps in the hall. Scarlett appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, her belly poking out from under a tight sweater. She had that smug look on her face, like she was enjoying every second of my misery. "Finally leaving, huh?" she said casually. I ignored her, concentrating on folding the last of my clothes into a duffel bag. "Wow. You're not even going to say goodbye?" she continued, entering the room as if she owned it. "I guess it's just as well. We can finally focus on being a real family now that you're out of the picture." I remained silent, but my hands were shaking. I just wanted to get out of there without causing a scene. But Scarlett wasn't done. She leaned closer and smiled. "Bye, loser," she said, her voice full of fake joy. "Good luck. You'll need it." I took a deep breath and turned to face her. I didn't yell. I didn't curse her, even though every part of me wanted to. I just smiled coldly and said, "Good luck with my dad. You'll need it more than I will." She blinked, caught off guard for a second, but I didn't wait for her answer. I walked out of the room, out of the house, and didn't look back. Later that night, I took a bus to my mother's house in the next town. She lived with my grandmother, who was slowly losing her memory. Some days she forgot who we were altogether. Mom had been taking care of her full-time since the divorce, so she couldn't work. They lived on the savings Grandma had left over from her days as a successful lawyer. It wasn't much, but it got them by. When I walked through the door, Mom hugged me like she never wanted to let go. She didn't immediately ask why I was there, but I knew she could tell something was wrong. Once we sat down, I told her everything: how Dad had cut me off, how Scarlett's family was cheering him on, and how I had no place to go. She shook her head and sighed heavily. "I always knew your father was selfish, but I didn't think he'd stoop so low. You don't deserve this, Carter. None of it." I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded and leaned back into the couch, exhausted from everything. I was mentally and physically drained. But I knew I couldn't stay down there for long. There was no plan B here. If I wanted a future, I had to make one for myself. The next few weeks were tough. I started working nights at a nearby McDonald's and took day shifts as a bike messenger. The schedule was brutal. I barely slept and was constantly running on fumes. I kept thinking about my dad and Scarlett, imagining them living comfortably in that house, pretending I didn't exist. Their words echoed in my head during those long, lonely nights. Loser. In the way. Not part of the family. But I wouldn't let that define me. Every shift, every delivery, I told myself I'd prove them wrong. I was going to show them I wasn't a failure. I would survive and thrive without them. Months passed, and life was a blur of work and exhaustion. I'd wake up after a few hours of sleep, ride my bike for hours delivering groceries, then ride to McDonald's for the night shift. Rinse and repeat. I didn't even have time to think about school. Tuition was out of reach, and my dream of graduating from college felt like it was slipping away with each passing day. Mom was doing her best to stay strong, but taking care of Grandma was wearing her down. Grandma's memory problems were getting worse. Sometimes she'd have moments of clarity, remembering who I was and even asking about my dad. But most days she was confused and lost in her own thoughts. I hated seeing her like that. She had been this sharp, no-nonsense lawyer when I was younger, and now she didn't even recognize the house she lived in. I came home one night after a long shift at McDonald's, my clothes smelling like fryer grease. I found Mom in the kitchen, crying quietly at the table. She didn't hear me come in at first. "Mom?" I asked gently. She quickly wiped her eyes and tried to smile, but I could tell something was wrong. "It's Grams," she said quietly. "She's gone." I stood there in shock. Gone? Just like that? The next few days were a blur of phone calls, arrangements, and family members we hadn't seen in years coming out of the woodwork. It was overwhelming. The funeral was small and somber, just a handful of people who had known Grandma in her better days. I didn't cry during the service. I don't know why. Maybe I was too numb to feel anything. But after everyone left, and it was just me and Mom standing at her grave, it finally hit me. Grandma was really gone. What I didn't expect was what came next. A week after the funeral, Mom and I were called into a lawyer's office. Grandma had left a will, and I figured whatever was left would go to help Mom with her expenses. We weren't expecting much, since we thought most of her savings had already been spent on her care. The attorney greeted us and began to read the will. Then he got to the part that left us both speechless. "To my grandson, Carter, I leave the house and $48,000 to help him start his future. Do with it what you will. Just don't let me down." I froze. I heard the words, but I didn't believe them. I turned to Mom, and she looked just as stunned. We had no idea that Grandma still had that kind of money saved up. For the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside of me. It wasn't just relief, it was hope. Real, tangible hope. I could go back to school. I could make a life for myself. I could finally breathe. Mom hugged me, tears in her eyes. "She believed in you, Carter. She always did." The money wasn't enough to live on forever, but it was enough to start over. I quit both my jobs, enrolled in a nearby college for the next semester, and started planning my future. For the first time in months, I could see a path forward. But just as things were starting to settle down, my phone buzzed with a message from my dad. I hadn't heard from him since Thanksgiving. "Hey, Carter. I'd like you and your mom to come over for dinner. There's something I want to talk to you about." I stared at the message for a long time. Mom wasn't interested in seeing him, she made that clear right away. "He's probably in the middle of something," she said. "If you want to go, fine. But don't let him take advantage of you." I didn't want to go either, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know what he wanted. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. The weekend came and I went to his house. Scarlett met me at the door with a baby in her arms. I hadn't even known the child was born. He was 5 months old now, but honestly, I couldn't bring myself to care. This child meant nothing to me. Neither did Scarlett. She didn't say much when I came in, which was fine with me. I didn't want to hear her voice. Dad was waiting for me in the dining room. We sat down and he immediately launched into an awkward speech about how sorry he was to hear about Grandma's passing. He said he knew how hard it must have been for my mom. It was all so fake, like he was following a script. Then he got to the real reason he invited me. "I know your grandmother was a successful woman," he said, trying to sound casual. "She probably left a good legacy. Did you or your mother get it?" I could see where this was going. I took a sip of water and said, "I did. She left me the house and some money. Dad's eyes lit up, but he tried to play it cool. Wow, Carter. That's great. I'm really happy for you. He paused, then leaned forward. Listen, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Things have been tight around here lately. My salary got cut, and Scarlett needs some money to, get her body back in shape after the pregnancy. He actually said that. Out loud. Like it was the most reasonable request in the world. You have the money now, he continued. Maybe you could help us out a little. I mean, I helped you out for years. It's only fair, right? I stared at him, stunned. Was he serious? Did he really think I'd help him after all he'd done to me? I clenched my jaw, my anger boiling over. No, I said, my voice calm. I'm not giving you a dime. I came here because I wanted to see how bad things were for you. And you know what? I'm coming back next time when it's even worse just to tell you no again. His face turned red, and Scarlett looked like she was going to scream, but I didn't stick around to hear it. I got up, grabbed my coat, and walked out, slamming the door behind me. After that night at my dad's house, I didn't hear from him for a while. Life went back to normal for me, or at least my new version of normal. I was back in school, working toward a degree in business administration. I'd moved into Grandma's old house with Mom, and for the first time, we both felt like we could breathe again. No more scraping by. No more double shifts or ramen noodles. Then, about 6 months later, I started hearing things through the grapevine. My dad's perfect little life wasn't so perfect anymore. It turned out that his company had downsized, and the pay cut he mentioned wasn't just a cut, it was a demotion. He was struggling to pay the bills, and Scarlett wasn't exactly the ride-or-die type. She had a new plan for her life, and it didn't involve my dad. One of my old friends from high school filled me in. Dude, did you hear? Scarlett dumped your dad, he said over the phone one day. Wait, what? I asked, caught off guard. Yeah. She packed up and left. Moved to Miami with some rich guy. Apparently she's living it up now. Took the baby too. I almost laughed. The irony was almost too good to be true. My dad had kicked me out to focus on his new family, and now that family had kicked him out. He was left alone, broke, and humiliated. A few weeks after I heard the news, Dad showed up on our doorstep. I couldn't believe it. It was the first time he'd been in this house since the divorce. I hardly recognized him. He looked older, worn down, like life had beaten him up. Mom answered the door, and the moment she saw him, her expression hardened. She didn't even invite him in. What do you want, Michael? She asked, crossing her arms. He gave her a weak smile. I wanted to talk. To both of you. I know I made mistakes, but I'm trying to make things right. I came to the door and stood beside Mom. He looked at me, his eyes full of regret. I could tell he wasn't expecting a warm welcome, but he was hoping for some kind of mercy. Too bad for him we had none left to give. Carter, he said, his voice low and pleading. I know I let you down. I was selfish and I hurt you. I'm sorry. I lost everything, my job, Scarlett, even my family. I just want a second chance. Please, let me make it up to you. I stared at him, remembering everything he'd done. The Thanksgiving announcement. Scarlett laughing at me as I packed my things. The way he cut me off without a second thought. Now he was here, begging for forgiveness because he had no one else. You want a second chance? I said, my voice cold. What was my second chance when you threw me out? When you let those people treat me like garbage? You didn't care about me then. You only care now because you have no one else. Mom stepped forward. Michael, we have moved on. We don't need you anymore. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. He looked crushed. I could tell he hadn't expected us to be so unforgiving. He opened his mouth to speak, but Mom cut him off. Go, she said firmly. Don't come back. Dad hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. I understand, he murmured. I'm I'm sorry." He turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. We watched him go, and for the first time I felt completely at peace. The weight of all the resentment and anger I'd been carrying for years finally lifted. He was out of our lives forever, and I didn't look back. We never saw him again after that. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he moved to a smaller town and took a lower-paying job. His life never got back to what it was. Meanwhile, mine was just getting started. I was building something real, something he could never take away from me. And that was the best revenge of all. 1 year later, everything was different. I'd found my footing and was finally making good money. I got a job at a marketing firm while still finishing my degree. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well and gave me the experience I needed to move up. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just struggling to make ends meet. Mom had also started working again. It was hard for her to move on after Grandma died, but she eventually found a job at a local nonprofit. It gave her a purpose, and seeing her happy and thriving again gave me a sense of peace. We didn't have to worry about bills or whether we had enough money for food. We were stable. The money Grandma had left me hadn't gone to my education, as Mom had wanted. She had insisted that I use it to pay for college and invest in my future. But I couldn't do that. That money was a gift from Grandma to help both of us. Instead, I gave most of it to my mother to help her rebuild her life. She tried to argue at first, but I told her the truth. "I have to do this on my own. I want to grow up, Mom. I want to stand on my own 2 feet, not depend on anyone." She understood. After all we'd been through, she saw how much I had changed. I wasn't the same lost kid who had been thrown out on Thanksgiving. I had learned how to fight for myself, how to persevere, and how to build a future out of nothing. The old me, the boy who depended on his father for everything, was gone. In its place was someone who knew what it meant to be independent, to be a man. I wasn't bitter anymore. I didn't need revenge or validation from my father. He was a ghost of the past, someone who had made his choices and had to live with them. I wasn't going to waste any more of my life chasing his approval. From now on, I was in control. I was building a life for myself, brick by brick. And with every step I took, I knew my grandmother would be proud. This was now my story. Not his. Not anyone else's. Mine.